Now, in order to effectively use power, you need to use a mixture of soft and hard power. And this final area is smart power. You need to use your power in a smart way. There's no point in having lots of, like, a huge economy and military unless you use it in an effective way. Now, the basic rule of the game of international relations is you need to match your ambitions to your national capabilities. You shouldn't overreach, but you shouldn't be shy either in exercising your country's power. Now, maybe a good way of making this clear is showing you a good example of it and a bad example. A good example of using smart power is China at the moment, which is gradually increasing its power through taking control of areas of the South China Sea, also creating more trade partners through the Belt and Road Initiative. The US, after the Second World War, also cleverly used its power through using its economic muscle to create trade relations within the EU, but also with Asian countries. And also the fact that it built Pax Americana, a military alliance across the world that was supportive of US interests. A bad example, a good bad example of this is Nazi Germany. So from 1941 to 1945, the reason that Nazi Germany lost the Second World War was because it did not match its ambitions to its national capabilities. It fought a war on multiple different fronts, so to the west and to the east, and it did not have the capabilities to fight this war. So if we just quickly look at this video. So this will give you an impression of how Nazi Germany was just too ambitious with it was too ambitious. Its capabilities in terms of its economic and military might was not sufficiently um, powerful to fight a war on these multiple fronts. So if we can see gradually as Russia and the Allies attack Germany, they basically lose control of all of this territory, and ultimately the Nazi state is destroyed. Now, another example for today is the United Kingdom. The United Kingdom is trying to negotiate with the European Union. Uh, it is one country versus 27. The UK believes that it will get a favorable trade deal from from the European Union, and ultimately this is not likely to happen because 27 countries are more powerful than the United Kingdom. The outcome of these negotiations is not going to be favorable to the UK's interests. So, how can we use our understanding specifically of hard power to get better at political analysis? Well, this is going to be really important for your diplomatic simulation because I really want you guys to be able to do effective political analysis of your selected country, whether it is Russia, whether it is Saudi Arabia, or whether it is China. Now, one of the areas that you could look at, apart from things like geopolitics, like looking at geography influences a country's foreign policy, is looking at the distribution of power within the globe, but also within the region itself. So, the first concept is asymmetrical interdependence. And basically, what this means is power is not equal between countries. Um, so if country A needs country B for resources, but country B does not need country A as much, then country B will be able to exploit country A to advance its self interests. So the outcome of this relationship will favor country A. An example of this is Russian gas to Eastern Europe. So a lot of countries, as we know, are really dependent on Russian gas in this territory. So Russia can manipulate the price of gas to disrupt the supply of gas to these countries. And the outcome means that countries like Georgia here and countries like Ukraine, even though they want to join the European Union, ultimately they're so dependent on Russian gas that they are very vulnerable and sensitive to Russian pressure and disruption to their energy security. And for that reason, they have not joined the European Union yet. So, this is an example of asymmetrical interdependence, where one country is less powerful than the other, and the stronger country can take advantage of the weaker country. A second example, which we looked at before, is Chinese asymmetrical relationship with Sri Lanka. So China is clearly much more powerful than Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka is a very poor country, and Sri Lanka accepted investments to create a port in Sri Lanka, and this was built by Chinese money and by Chinese workers. Ultimately, Sri Lanka could not pay back the loan, and then China took control of a port here. And as we know, having a port here is extremely important because basically it gives China much better security and strategic control over this area that is really important for its trade relations with the Middle East and Africa. Another area that you need to understand and look at is power distributions. So when thinking about the possibility, and I'll just make that clear actually. Let me just go down here. When thinking about the possibility of peace, war, stability, and instability in the world or specific regions, you need to look at power distributions. Now, I'm not going to speak at length about this slide. This is something that you guys can look at yourselves. But what I will give you an example of is the three different forms of power within the international systems. So we have unipolar, which is where one country dominates. So you can see one country dominates other countries here, and the other countries just follow this country. We have bipolar as well, where there are two powerful countries, and then you have the two powerful countries having alliances and spheres of influence, where other smaller countries get behind one of the two powerful countries. This is a good example would be the Cold War, where you have the US and the Soviet Union. And then you have a multipolar system where you have more than two powerful countries. So let's say US, China, the European Union, Russia, and India. And all of these countries are competing for domination within the international system. And there's an absence of hierarchy in the system. So let's look at unipolar again. So unipolar would be where one country dominates. So let's say the US, and other countries basically fall behind and accept the US dominated order. They accept the creation of security alliances which benefit the United States. They accept the creation of international institutions like the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, which are pro-capitalist, which is good for US interests. And you have a system where the US dominates these areas here. It also has a security alliance here, so it's a huge role over Europe. And then you have maybe some competing countries like China and Russia, but ultimately most of the world is influenced by this one power, for example, the US. This system is generally peaceful because most countries accept the domination of one country and they do not challenge it. You then have a bipolar world, and the bipolar world is where you have two dominant countries. So, for example, the US and the Soviet Union, and then you have countries which ally with the US or Russia, and then the world divides it between two spheres of influence. And generally, this situation is quite stable as well because both blocks, both spheres of influence, um, they cancel each other out. So these two spheres of influence are generally as powerful as each other, and neither side really wants to fight a direct war because neither side would win conclusively. You then have a multipolar world as well. And this is where you have more than two powerful countries competing for military, economic, and cultural influence. So, this could be the situation with, US, the EU, Russia, China, India, Brazil, all of these countries competing for influence in the international system, competing for domination and control. Unlike a unipolar or a bipolar world, a multipolar world can be generally quite unstable because basically countries like Russia and China, who are emerging as more powerful countries, are dissatisfied with the existing US based order. I'll just put that in. And they will challenge things like NATO. They will challenge things like Pax Americana here. They will be more aggressive militarily. They will, like Russia, try and weaken the EU and the United States. Like China, they will try to get other countries to join their sphere of influence. So, for example, in Africa, uh, and through the Belt and Road Initiative in Central Asia, the Middle East, and also Europe to an extent as well.